Okay, can you type in the chat box, what vocabulary do you think your learners need? Okay, daily basic communication. Yes, if you're teaching them to communicate in English language. Career, academic purposes. Communication is very broad, but the question would be, Jackie, communication with whom? Because communication, if you are, say, someone who is going to be in business, will be different if it's communication with the examiner for SPM. So what other vocab do they need? Advanced physics vocabulary, that's domain. High frequency words, thank you very much. Words related to shopping, one of the major things that's happening in our country at the moment, online shopping, daily needs. Okay, so already in your answers, from advanced physics to vocab for exam purpose, you can see that we still need to select frequent vocabulary. Now, apart from specific vocabulary that you may need in advanced physics or in business, you really have to decide what is the context for the learners in what they need to learn. So there is no harm in looking at the academic word list or looking at the 3,000 word lists, and your Uncle Google can tell you all about that, because for all of these contexts, you'll find the basic principle at work. The first 3,000 words, out of what is 270,000 English words, the first 3,000 can cover a lot. So this is one of my key messages. And then on top of that, you will have specific vocabulary. So if you are, and don't lie, if you're a Malaysian secondary school teacher preparing for the exam, see what are the successful exam question answers and work with that vocabulary there. Okay, hello to a good friend from Malacca. Now, with the vocabulary of 1,000 to 2,000 of the most useful words, you can get most things done. This is the key point. You can get most things done with 1,000 to 2,000. So even if they're working with maths and science teachers, and they say they're very territorial about their vocabulary, because I've got a comment here. They say they're very territorial. You can find the same vocabulary online from other maths and science teachers. But underneath it all, remember, the high frequency words are going to be shared. Often the content area lectures, and I'm deviating from my slides to answer a question in the chat box. Often the content area lecturers are very possessive about their domain because they think, wow, we are the experts. But remember, look at it here. The higher frequency words are most useful, used most often, are 2,000 to 3,000 words, and the function words are not the ones. That's not the ofs and because. It's nouns, verbs, and adjectives and adverbs. And the key lies in repetition of the important 3,000 words, whether you are doing English for vocab purpose or business. Now, if you're reading a novel, you need about 8,000 words. And the point is now that many publishers are working with this. I'm going to talk about how do you get them up there so that they are using the most frequent vocabulary. And I don't mean giving them endless lists because they will die of boredom. So Averill Coxhead, who you just heard, also found that even in a science lab, to answer someone from the secondary school, they can work in a lab with 3,000 English words. You might say, wow, that's a lot. But hey, pick up a dictionary, see how thick it is, and it's the selection that is important. So we need to work with ones that are significant for our learners' needs. Now, one of the big clues to learning visual cues, but visual cues can be difficult. Okay, I want you to look at this challenging language item. It is not in English. This was given to everybody by Barami's auntie. Please type in the box, what do you think it is? And I'll tell you the reason I'm doing this weird thing shortly. But what do you think this is in the box? Could you type your answer? Please don't tell me it's flowers. I know that, but what do you think it is? Please type an answer. We have opening a new business, congratulatory wreath, funeral wreath, wishing the Hua Suriname clan. Yes, very clever, good. Deepest condolences, condolence wreath. No, none of you have got it, folks. Because if a vocab item is outside our cultural context, it's very difficult, isn't it? Okay. This is a congratulatory flower offering on the occasion of a wedding. Ah, yes. It's a wedding bouquet. And you can see that it's in both Chinese and Korean. Okay. I went to this wedding, by the way, because it's my son's wedding. Yeah, you're 50% correct, but it is congratulatory. Now, I got you guessing and trying to think what it was because I aroused your curiosity. Of course, if I had written the word wedding, it would be easier for you to understand it, right? So my point is this. Ah, correct. You could have guessed from the color, but in guessing from the color, and in guessing from the shape, perhaps, you know, you climb the mountain of happiness, believe it or not. They say that about marriage. I don't know. So you take your own cultural knowledge to what's happening with vocab learning. We should never forget that. And remember, when we learn a new vocab item like this one, we learn it as a concept as well. And how do we learn it? Well, we balance the learning across 4 strands that you've just heard about. We need the input. Stephen Krashen talks about this, listening and reading. But we need to get learners using the language, speaking and writing. Now, wasn't that frightening that we heard this morning that teacher talk, 53% of it is organizing the classroom? I wonder how much learner talk there is. So input, output, and language-focused learning, the pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar, and fluency development. Our problem often is, and our exam system does this, we often focus on the language focus, but not on providing output for the learners. Because if you don't use a language, you lose it. And remember that what happens with vocab learning is determined by what we get learners to do. So, is it meaning focused when they're learning a word? Or is it the form? And really we need both. So we couldn't get that was a wedding bouquet because we didn't understand the characters or the form. So the form is important as well as the meaning. Now, let me give you an example of how there can be difficulties and how we can ease up the difficulties. Are you ready to listen? Because I'm going to get you to do a listening exercise. This is input, right? Marie, you've got a good question. Got guessing about the wedding bouquet. Could it be a Christian couple because of the palm leaves? Very good observation. Yes, they are Korean Catholics. So well guessed there, okay? But once again, you see, Marie, what you're doing is you're drawing on your knowledge, which we must provide learners with the opportunity to do as well, to draw on their knowledge, okay? So I know too about SPM that pupils are going to get tested on the 4 skills. So let's try a very important one, the Cinderella skill, listening. Okay, so here we go with listening. And I want you to listen to this. Yeah, and I want you to listen as you would just normally listen. And then I'm going to make the point that focus on vocabulary depends on the task, but just listen to this short one. Lanching, you'll like this one. Self-reflection may include how we critique our own pedagogy or teaching and felicitation philosophy. It can be useful to ask how our own identity and values. It can be useful to ask how our own identity and values as an educator, learner, and Netzian impact on how we teach, organize information flows, or facilitate learning through interaction. Such self-examination or self-reflection may be especially poignant as the transition to online or hybrid learning has thrust our own learning style into meeting pushed change. This is from an article by Stephen J. Hall. What's the difficulty in learning like this? Can you type in the chat box? What's the difficulty? Yes, there's some complex, infrequent vocabulary. Yes, there's academic vocabulary, and academic vocabulary is a genre in itself. You are missing the same thing that you were missing with the wedding bouquet. Okay, Geraldine, you say the text is difficult. Why is the text difficult? Thank you. Lack of clues, lack of cues. I have no context, right? And you say involves only listening. Some may not be able to pay attention. And difficulty with understanding my New Zealand pronunciation. Sorry, but everybody has an accent but me, ha ha ha. Context, no topic, context, no context, and topic is boring. Depends a lot on previous knowledge. Yes. Thank you for those answers, because it becomes easier too if you're able to support the listening with reading the top paragraph. So just now, have a quick look at the top paragraph. Right, it is much easier if we use our 2 senses. Because if we're going to acquire new vocabulary, we need to provide multiple routes, multiple modalities to memory. And secondly, this academic text that I wrote is difficult because it's a very true fact. The longer the words, the more difficult they are for our learners, just like you couldn't read the Korean characters. So the longer the text words are, the more difficult it is for vocabulary learning. Okay, now, I got you to focus on meaning. I never provided context. I never gave you a reason to listen. I never gave you a reason to be interested in the vocabulary. I never gave you a task. All of those things are necessary if we are to look at focused on input that's effective input. I would argue, however, that sometimes we should have input without lots of tasks. And I'd like to pick up on what Avril talked about earlier. Some time ago in Malaysia, we had a program that I thought was absolutely wonderful in schools. It was called Drop Everything and Read. And somehow or other it got stopped. And that saddened me. because we need to provide the input of vocabulary. And one of the best things is graded readers. Now, some of you are teaching, I saw advanced physics and so on, are teaching at the tertiary level, but there's also graded readers at the intermediate level in factual areas. We need the input of frequent words. So look at what's happening with the extensive reading foundation. So when Paul Nation talks about the 4 strands, and he talks about the input, he's saying maximize the time by using the high frequency words. And that even in science and maths tests, as Avril showed us, as Avril showed us earlier, there's still a lot of coverage with the first 3,000 to 4,000 words. So have a look. I've left it on a long time there. So you have a look at the extensive reading idea. Sitting down and reading helps, especially when everybody's burying themselves in short texts of WhatsApp. Now, remember then that vocab learning is going to depend on what you get people to do. Sometime it might be a form focus. So you guys are all high-end educators. So I'd like you to look at this word cloud, and there's a good website there. You can generate your own word clouds by just typing in texts, and that comes up with all the words of the text, yeah? And it's fun for learners. So vocab learning depends on what we get people to learn for and how we get them to learn and how we get them to focus. So let's come away from input and look at language form focus. Can you type the 3 or 4 syllable words in the chat box? Because I'm getting you to do a very discrete form focused task for vocabulary. And by the very act of typing, and there's research on this, you start internalizing a word. Remember this in our online pandemic time. Can you type 3 or 4 syllable words and choose the 3, just type the one that really interests you. Go. Wow, fast, yes. Thank you, Marie Wong. Thank you, Lisa. We want to hear from the other 47 people. We've got 50 in this workshop, which is wonderful. Thank you. Now make sure you choose the one that really interests you, because I've got a task with it later. Thank you. Now, if you're not typing, can you write it down? If it's easier for you to write it down, one or the other. Thank you. Discernment, enlightenment, accomplishments, experience. I hope you're having a good experience. School intelligence, there's a good one. We need to give that to many principals. Whoops. Thank you, Holly. You're coming from a long way away, I know. Correlation, excellent. Okay, now have you got your word? I want you to hang on to your word. Yeah, you're going to choose one word you really, really like. Okay? So I'm going to move on because I've got lots I want to say. I talk nearly as fast as my friend Avril, but not quite. Now, you've got that word in mind. Now remember something. Often we try to do too much in a too shallow a way because we need 7 exposures before internalizing a word. Sorry, that should be word there. A word for productive use. Okay? Now, we've had some comments. We looked a little bit about the fact that we need the input. We need extensive reading. We need exposure to the frequent words. And there's a lot of stuff online. You just have to ask Auntie Google. There's a lot of stuff online to do with the frequent words, yeah? So I'm going to now turn to meaning-focused output, which is speaking and writing. Now, you and I know that the vocab for speaking is different from the vocab for writing. So again, we need to think, going back, what are our learners and what are their needs? So say, for example, we look at the idea of fluency. And I know now that in Malaysia, we're looking at assessing speaking, which is extremely difficult to do, by the way. But one tool I would like to share with you to develop fluency. So we've talked about the input that's needed: listening, extensive reading. But we need to also provide for the output. So we're not looking at form here. We need to provide fluency, because you only keep a language alive by using it. Yeah, I know this with the languages I speak, some of which I've lost. So I'm going to move a bit here to draw your attention to Vocaroo. It is not an obscure kind of kangaroo, but I found this fun with my learners to do. Okay, why do I like this? Most of our time, our learners get malufication. Malu is Malay for embarrassed. They get, I don't want to talk, I lose face. What will the teacher think of me? I'm not going to say anything. Well, Vocaroo is very good. Why? They can record themselves and they don't have to go onto some other app. Yeah, it's all there. And they can send you a recording of themselves. And better still, they can listen to themselves. This is a frightening experience. Oh my gosh, I sound that bad. But Vocaroo is very useful in that they get a chance to be fluent and to practice and to repeat vocabulary, spoken vocabulary, and listen to the sound of it. Listen to that panachatan. Sorry, listen to the pronunciation of a particular word. So in learning vocabulary, we need different memory traces. We need to be able to listen to it. We need to be able to think what it looks like. And I use pictures a lot when I'm learning vocab, but I also like to hear the sound of it. Yeah, when I was learning New Zealand Maori, I had to practice in front of a mirror and tape record myself saying ngango, which is quite difficult for many Matsali white guys to say ngango, because the sound isn't in English. So vocabulary is quite usefully developed if you can look at the spoken form as well. Remembering that memory traces for vocab, for some people, are stronger because they are audio people, audio, and other people like the visuals, and other people prefer the spoken word. So don't forget the spoken word. Now, that was fluency, but don't forget form. For example, have a look at this picture. You are mentally saying to yourself what you see, I guarantee. Now, if we're to look at the form, and I was to give you this and say a dozen or 12, type a word that comes to mind. A dozen or 12. Can you type the word? Hello. Can you use the picture, please, Jacqueline? Can you see a dozen eggs? Or maybe you can. Okay, paratroopers. Teamwork. A dozen. Okay, sorry. Can you do you're not following teacher instructions. A dozen people. I see a flower. Okay. I see skydivers, heads, excitement, spider web. Okay, now, can you answer my question? A dozen what? A dozen freedom? A dozen strong skydivers? Thank you. So if we're developing vocabulary, a lot is thrill seekers, thanks. A lot is determined by how you ask the question. So here's my next question. Listen carefully. If I wanted to, for some obscure reason, have the question a dozen, and I say, are you ready, folks? Okay, colorful skydivers, thank you. What if I was to change the question to a dozen starting with H? Starting with H. 12 starting with H. Hell seekers. Woohoo! I don't think they died at the end of this, by the way. Heroes, thank you. Humans, hopes. High flyers. Very clever. A dozen, half of 24. Correct. Now, you see, you cannot always have one right answer if you're going to work with learners and develop their vocabulary. And this is a problem we have with our joyous examinations. So I was thinking this, a dozen helmets, a dozen hopefuls not going to die in this stunt. So whenever we develop vocabulary, we need to remember that the way we ask questions of learners is always going to involve their own knowledge. A dozen high achievers, good pun. A dozen having fun. So whenever we are looking at developing vocabulary, we need to consider that different answers are possible, not just what I would have thought was the right answer, a dozen helmets. Now, I'm looking at principles, obviously, and you know that, for example, there are some texts out there that can help us, vocabulary in textbooks, English, Common European Framework of Reference, Rides Again, it's big in Malaysia. And my point I want to make is that when we learn vocabulary, we need to learn it in the context, and we need to consider learners' knowledge as well, and accept that they will have different vocabulary levels, especially when we don't really know how much vocabulary they know. Which is why Prof. Averill was talking about the need to find out what is the level of our learners with their vocabulary. And before you go and say, let's learn lists, no, it needs context and it needs visuals before the vocabulary becomes internalized, because you're also working with a learner's own vocabulary store. So I'm going to go from flying in the sky here now, and to talk about, by space significant repetition, repeating the same thing. Down the bottom here, you will see a site, Paul Nations Resources, which contains many of the tools that Averill talked about this morning, looking at word lists, yeah? So Paul Nation suggests that in our programs, we need a balance of 25% of each of these: input, listening, and reading. So it's a pity that we don't have in many Malaysian classrooms the thing that used to be there of 10 minutes of a teacher modeling reading, especially when we have so many short fake texts wandering around in the world of WhatsApp. Reading is still very, very critical for input, but we need to give them the opportunity for output. Use recording tools for speaking output. When they're writing, make it clear that they can be writing for fluency, just to develop writing, because even good creative writers or writers of books like me know you have to write and rewrite and practice and rewrite, otherwise you get nowhere. So we need the input, the output, and we need to focus sometimes on the form. And this is where it doesn't pay to learn the same vocab items together, like learning all of the round orange fruit together or yellow fruit together. You know, is a melon and an orange and a tangerine and a lemon. It's not good to learn those all together. It's better to put them in a context. I use the lemon to make sour lemonade, for example. So we also need to think about fluency development. So Paul Nation suggests we need 1, 2, 3, 4 strands. And we need to consider all of the skills online. Okay? So I also think now, as we're online, all of us, no choice, here we are, that spoken intonation is extremely important as well. Why? Because I'm just the talking head. And keeping them entertained is going to be difficult, right? So we need to consider positive conditions for learning, principle 3, and rewards for progress and building a sense of winning the game. And now, here we go, folks. Tracy, are you there to help me out?
Yes,
because
Prof.
we are going to quiz time. Because without interaction online, there's no learning and no acquisition. So now we have the talented and lovely Tracy Lim to fire away with quiz time.
Okay, first question, launching it now. All right. Can everyone see it on your screen? If yes, you let me know in the chat box. And you can start voting. Are you able to vote? Yep, I can see it now. There are 3 who voted. Number 7. Yes, keep the votes coming, guys. Prof. Stephen, just to let you know, there are some responses in the chat box as well.
Yes, I can see them in the chat box.
Great. Okay,
Yes,
we only have 51, okay, 55 voted. Keep the votes coming in. Yep. Okay, 67% only.
Okay, we'll call that one for the first one. Yes, I should have told you, you can click the box. Okay? So there's a bit of digital literacy for you. You can click the box. Let's move on to the second question. And the answer is, you need 7 exposures. And actually, if you're going to be productive, you may probably need even more exposures. Okay? So thank you. You got it right. So my point is this. You don't just say the same thing again. You don't 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 say blah, blah, blah. You got the message. The point is to put it into different contexts, just like the wedding bouquet. Establish different contexts. It can be 8, Lisa, your point. It doesn't mean they will remember the meaning. Okay, good point. So can I just pick up on this before we do the next question, Tracy? I heard it was 8 times to be internalized. It doesn't mean they will remember the meaning. Well, internalization means what? So if you're going to internalize it, it's probably more with the research, internalize it so you know how to use it. Yeah. Whether they can say the definition is a different measure. Let's go to question 2.
Yep, it's up now. So teachers, you may start voting now.
Use the box, please.
Sorry, guys, it's retention. Yep.
Aha. Here's a very good example. The importance of form and the underrated skill of spelling.
Okay, I shall end the poll now.
Okay, you've got a question here, Tracy. Someone wants to know what's the app you used for the poll?
Okay, Geraldine. Okay, basically this is the app that is installed, that is part of Zoom actually. So it's not an additional app. Yeah, it's in Zoom.
Yeah, so if you want to know about other apps, Geraldine, you can embed Slido into your PowerPoints if you're using PowerPoints. It's Slido. Slido is another one. There's Mentometer. There's quite a lot. But as Tracy has said, this one is inside the Zoom itself. It's a relatively new part of Zoom. Right. Yep. Teaching vocabulary in the set of the same kind of words helps retention, creates confusion, eases the learning burden. Actually, 3% of you got it right. Now, let me just address this before we have the next question. This is what is often assumed because we think that if we teach words in sets, like all the fruit, all the family, all the scientific cellular research tools in a set. This is wrong. The research makes it clear that it's more important to learn an item in the context of its usage. So say, for example, come back to my fruit thing before, when I said the sliced orange was juicy and delicious, like its color, rather than learning orange, tangerine, grapefruit. Because the visualization is visualizing things that are too close together. So actually, it's better to learn it in an interesting context or an interesting sentence. You know, so say if I was using colors and I said, with Trump being kicked out of the presidency, we see the loss of the orange man. You got the visualization in your head, yeah? So learning in sets is actually not the best idea at all. Okay, here we come to one last question. Tracy, the third question is coming up. Providing attention, and now I'm going to do what I said we should do, right? Providing attention to the form of an item is outdated and inadequate, enhances memory traces, serves little purpose, or demotivates communicative learners. Please choose the right answer. Just one. How are we going, folks? We've got 50 of you, and some of you have still got to poll. Just choose one. We learn anyway. Just like anything else, vocabulary learning is the same. We learn by making mistakes. That's what we sometimes forget as teachers. By making mistakes, we learn. Don't be shy. Yes, I miss our face-to-face encounter in some way too, Geraldine. I really do. Okay. Okay, Lisa, let me do the poll, then I'll answer your question. Hey, Lisa, is this you from down in JB? I think so. How are we going, Tracy?
All right, I shall end the poll now. By the way, Lisa answered yes to your question.
Hey, nice. Lovely to see you, even if I can't see you. I'm going to get you to turn on your webcam soon. I hate talking to names on screen. Right, here comes our poll result. Remember, as we said, this is the one that's embedded in Zoom. You can try it out. I've just been lazy because I've got very helpful colleagues at Someway. So here come the results. And then we'll tackle using the academic word list, if not by sets. Okay, right, excellent. We have 65% saying that it enhances memory traces. Others are saying it demotivates communicative learners. Let me deal with these answers then. That's the last of our quizzes. So thank you very much, Tracy, for your help. That's great. And we're going to finish off very shortly as well. I just realized I'm a bit like my friend. I always try and do too much. April, that is. So here we go. Using the form will only demotivate the communicative learners if you don't put it in a fun task. Because remember, vocabulary learning, and as in all learning, depends on what you get the learners to do. So remember, I asked you to look at all the polysyllabic words before. That was form-based, right? Now, if I asked you to take that word and put it in a sentence starting with I, then we can blend the form and the communicative. Now, Lisa, very good question here. How do we use the academic word list to introduce vocabulary if not by sets? Okay. What you can do is, when you find, and you'll find it online, the academic word list, you could, for example, here's just one sort of task you could do. Take those words, type them into a word cloud generator. Remember, I showed you the word cloud generator earlier, and say to students, I want you to choose the 3 most interesting words for you that you don't know so well and put them in a sentence or put them in a group of sentences and send them to your friend, but put a question in there. In other words, to learn the academic word list, yes, they need lots of exposures, but they need different tasks. The other thing is matching tasks or on a topic. So if you look at the list, say, for example, and you look at on a topic, you don't necessarily have to have the same kind of words. So you could be adjectives mixed up with adverbs. But it's a matter of getting tasks that they use it productively rather than just learning them. However, flashcards and digital flashcards are also useful and quite fun. And you can make your own digital flashcards for online teaching. Again, ask Uncle Google. Okay, Lisa, does that answer you? I could go on a long time about this, but does that help? Talk to me, Lisa. I like voices. Okay, she's going to type. Now, remember that everything depends on, yeah, students don't like to make mistakes. Okay, Geraldine, can I answer that? Students don't, nobody likes to make mistakes, but we learn by mistakes. That's why things like Vokaru, a fluency activity, I highlight to my students, I just want you to talk. Then listen to yourself. Later, we'll deal with correcting it. I just want you to free write. Let the ideas come out. Throw up on the page. So when I do that, I signal this is a fluency activity. I am not going to whack you. Now, I've got to finish off because I've been told, as usual, I talk too much, like most teachers. We need to provide rewards for the students and keep them motivated. Yeah, look at digital flashcards. Look at recording, providing for fluency. What matters is the outcomes with variety. And use visuals. Visuals help a lot so that you can play it again, Paul. Play it again, Sam. Provide for space, significant repetition. Now, I got sidetracked by questions along the way. Yeah, but you can contact me at stephen.h@someway.edu.my, or you can look on my website for questions. But time is chasing us, folks, and we are moving on to the next workshop. I hope you found that useful, and I will see you after your next workshop in my plenary. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, bye-bye. And it's so nice to see familiar names and familiar faces here. I hope you've enjoyed this session and time for the session 2 workshop. Thank you so much for meeting, and so nice to meet and re-meet fellow educators. Over and out, and time for you to proceed to session 2 workshop. Thank you.
I will be ending this meeting now, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye all.